Monks surviving freezing nights in the Himalayan mountains, without clothes, without fire, and without shivering. You see a lone Tibetan monk sitting on snow-covered ground before dawn, steam rising softly from his bare shoulders. His breath is slow, almost invisible. No tension, no shaking. Just a steady heat coming from deep inside his body as the wind cuts across the mountains. In this video, you'll uncover how Tibetan monks generate internal warmth and rewire their perception of cold using rituals that combine ancient breathwork, internal muscle control, and psychological training, powerful enough to keep the body warm in temperatures that would send most people into hypothermia. And this matters because cold isn't just a physical force, it's one of the fastest triggers of panic, stress, and loss of control. I'm sharing this because I once believed surviving extreme cold was about endurance, until monks showed me it's actually about understanding how the body creates heat from the inside. But the most surprising part is this. Their ability to withstand the cold doesn't begin with breath or discipline. It begins when they're children, long before they ever face the snow. Long before a monk ever sits half-naked in the snow, his body has already been shaped for the cold. Not through heroic feats or brutal exposure, but through years of subtle training that begins in childhood. In Tibetan monasteries, the ability to generate internal heat, what the outside world calls Tumo, is not treated as a miracle. It is treated as biology refined through discipline, a capacity every human has, but almost no one develops. A young novice begins learning this before he even understands what Tumo is. The training comes through the environment itself: thin mountain air, cold floors, early mornings, long walks in icy courtyards. These daily conditions teach the child one thing: the body can adapt, and it adapts quickly when fear does not interfere. When a novice feels the first bite of cold on his skin, the reaction isn't to run toward heat, it's to breathe into the sensation. This teaches the nervous system not to panic, and that lesson becomes the foundation of everything that follows. Scientifically, what monks develop is a sophisticated control over thermogenesis, the body's ability to create heat. Brown fat activation, improved sympathetic regulation, efficient circulation in the extremities, and diaphragmatic movements that stimulate warmth deep in the core. But monks never talk in scientific terms. They describe it as awakening the inner fire, a sensation starting in the lower belly, rising up the spine, spreading across the chest, and eventually warming the skin. One of the earliest exercises novices learn is belly breathing without breath. They sit still, place their hands on their abdomen, and create a tiny rhythmic pulse by contracting deep muscles around the diaphragm and lower ribs. No large movements, no visible motion. But inside, these contractions activate blood flow and awaken tissues that most people never engage consciously. This internal rhythm becomes the seed of heat production later in life. Another childhood training comes from cold water rituals. Not immersion, just washing at dawn with icy water. The goal is not toughness, it's familiarity. The child learns that the sensation of cold is separate from the fear of cold. When the two are separated, the cold loses half its power. The body doesn't recoil. Instead, it prepares. It begins producing heat automatically through shivering thermogenesis at first. But over time, monks learn to replace involuntary shivering with intentional internal movements that are more efficient and far more controlled. There are also early lessons in stillness. Children sit in cold rooms without moving, focusing on the feeling of the skin tightening. Instead of resisting it, they study it. This is not meditation, it is observation. They learn to feel where the cold enters first, how it spreads, and how breath influences it. By understanding the pattern, they eventually learn to interrupt it. Many monks say that the moment you understand the shape of cold inside the body, you are no longer controlled by it. A senior monk once described the biology of Tumo with a single sentence: heat starts when the mind stops fleeing. When the novice learns not to mentally run away from the cold, the body shifts from defense to generation. The heart pumps differently. Blood redistributes. Muscles engage microscopically. Even the fascia begins to warm. What looks supernatural from the outside is simply the body reorganizing itself under a calm mind. As novices grow older, their training becomes more precise. They begin practicing the core techniques of Tumo in controlled settings. Slow breath holds, abdominal locks, visualization of flames rising from the spine, not imagined flames, but focused attention in the places where heat naturally begins. These practices increase vagal tone, reduce panic reflexes, and strengthen the deep core muscles that support heat production. By the time a monk reaches adulthood, he has learned something most people never experience. The cold is no longer perceived as a threat. It becomes a signal, a reminder to awaken the techniques he has practiced for years. The body responds instantly because the pathways are already built. But all this early training is only the foundation. Once a monk understands his biology, the next step is paradoxical. He must not resist the cold. He must embrace it, not to endure it, but to transform it. Because the true mastery of cold begins when a monk willingly steps into thermal shock. Monks don't survive extreme cold by avoiding it. They survive it by walking straight into it. The voluntary thermal shock ritual is one of the most misunderstood parts of their training. From the outside, it looks like punishment. Sitting in snow, stepping barefoot onto ice, letting cold wind hit exposed skin. But to a monk, this ritual is not about suffering. It is about teaching the body to stop interpreting cold as danger. The ritual begins with exposure, but not sudden, overwhelming exposure. A monk starts by stepping outside at dawn, when the air is at its sharpest. He stands still. He lets the cold touch his skin without fighting it. Most people tense immediately. Shoulders rise, breath shortens, muscles contract. A monk does the opposite. He softens the body, lowers the shoulders, and slows the breath. This signals to the nervous system that the cold is information, not attack. This moment is crucial. If the body tenses, the cold penetrates deeper. If the body relaxes, the skin becomes a barrier instead of a doorway. The cold stays at the surface. The monk opens the skin not by exposing it but by relaxing into the sensation. It is a psychological shift with biological consequences. Vasoconstriction becomes less extreme. Blood flow adjusts instead of retreating. The body begins preparing for heat production rather than bracing for loss. Once the monk has established this calm, he moves into controlled thermal shock. He might kneel on snow for a minute. He might place his palms on cold stone. He might walk slowly across a frozen stream. The goal is to send a clear message to the nervous system. Cold is not chaos. It can be observed, accepted, and eventually transformed. Monks describe this moment in simple terms. The cold enters, then dissolves. What they mean is that the sensation stops being perceived as a threat. When fear is removed, the cold becomes neutral. And when the cold becomes neutral, the body can start generating heat. This is the paradox at the center of their training. Resisting cold makes you colder. Accepting cold warms you. Modern physiology explains this through sympathetic control. Fear triggers fight or flight, which increases blood flow to the core and reduces circulation to the skin. But Tibetan practitioners can override this reflex. Their voluntary exposure teaches the brain to maintain balanced circulation even in freezing temperatures. During this ritual, monks also practice soft gaze awareness. They half close their eyes and focus not on objects but on the sensation of cold itself. The gaze settles, the mind slows, and the nervous system stops sending stress signals. This awareness helps the monk locate the cold where it touches, where it spreads, where it fades. When the mind knows the path of the cold, it can redirect energy toward those areas and create heat through subtle internal movements. A powerful part of the training involves a deliberate slowing of the breath during exposure. Instead of gasping or breathing rapidly, monks extend the exhale. This stabilizes the heart rate and prevents panic-induced shivering. Panic shivering is chaotic and inefficient. Monks replace it with controlled internal contractions that generate heat far more effectively. Sometimes, a group of monks performs this ritual together, sitting in snow with only thin cloths around their waists. No one speaks. Breath clouds rise and disappear in the cold air. Some monks smile softly, not because the cold is pleasant, but because they have learned to interpret the sensation differently. It is no longer pain. It is a test of attention. There is also a mental layer to the ritual. Monks visualize the cold as something external, touching only the surface of their body. They imagine a small distance between the skin and the deeper layers. This visualization is not mystical. It is a cognitive technique that reduces the perceived depth of the cold, making the sensation easier to manage. Once the monk has successfully embraced the cold, something remarkable happens. The body begins to warm itself from the inside without any external movement. This warmth does not come from shivering. It comes from a deeper mechanism, tiny internal contractions that activate the core. This leads into the next stage of their mastery, where the real fire begins. Once a monk has embraced the cold and prevented the body from entering panic, he begins activating something far more subtle, an internal movement so small that an observer would swear nothing is happening. This is the foundation of generating heat without shivering, without moving the limbs, and without relying on external sources. Monks call it the hidden tissue, a deep layer of muscular and diaphragmatic control that most people never consciously access. This technique starts in the diaphragm. Instead of breathing deeply or rapidly, the monk creates tiny contractions just below the ribs. These contractions are so subtle that the chest doesn't rise and the shoulders don't move. But inside, the diaphragm pulses rhythmically. Each pulse generates micro-friction, increasing blood flow and stimulating the core. It's like creating warmth from the engine room of the body. As the diaphragm pulses, the intercostal muscles, the small muscles between the ribs, begin to join the rhythm. They tremble lightly, not like shivering, but like controlled vibration. This vibration spreads heat around the chest cavity, warming organs and increasing circulation. The monk feels the warmth gathering slowly, like embers being fanned. Then the deepest abdominal muscles activate. Not the surface muscles, but the ones closer to the spine. These muscles contract and relax in waves, moving heat vertically through the torso. The monk doesn't force these movements. They emerge naturally once he has relaxed into the cold and maintained control over his breath. Over time, the contractions sync with the heartbeat. The warmth becomes stronger, more stable. At this point, the monk can raise his internal temperature without moving his arms or legs at all. From the outside, he appears completely still, but inside, his muscles are working like a silent furnace. This internal movement is not random. It is trained deliberately. Novices spend years learning to isolate small muscle groups, practicing micro-contractions while sitting quietly on the floor. They begin with simple exercises, tightening the lower belly for 1 second, then releasing, pulsing the diaphragm without inhaling, vibrating the ribcage with controlled tension. These skills become automatic, allowing them to produce heat efficiently when needed. Monks often practice near cold mountain streams. They sit on rocks, place their hands on their abdomen, and begin the contractions. The moment the cold touches their skin, the internal furnace ignites. The more they practice, the faster the warmth arrives. Some monks can reach full heat in under 30 seconds. The hidden tissue technique has another purpose: conserving energy. Shivering burns calories quickly and drains strength. Internal contractions, on the other hand, use minimal energy while producing steady heat. This allows monks to endure cold for hours without exhaustion. A senior monk once explained it as moving the body on the inside, so the outside does not need to move. He meant that the internal body can work independently of the external body. When monks master this, the cold loses its ability to control them. They can sit in the snow without trembling. They can rest barefoot on ice without pain. They can withstand freezing winds without huddling or curling the body. But generating heat is only half of their mastery. To sustain it and direct it throughout the body, monks rely on a sophisticated breathing system, one that layers 3 different breaths into a single synchronized pattern. This breathing is not about relaxation, it is about feeding the fire. Once the internal contractions have awakened the body's hidden furnace, the monk shifts into a breathing system unlike anything found in modern training. It is called layered breathing because it operates through 3 separate breaths, happening at the same time, each with its own rhythm and purpose. This is how monks distribute heat evenly through the body, prevent cold from settling in the extremities, and maintain warmth for long periods without fatigue. The first layer is the deep abdominal breath. This is the foundation. The monk draws air into the lowest part of the lungs, expanding the belly gently. But the inhale is not big. It is slow, steady, and controlled. The purpose of this layer is to create internal pressure around the organs, forcing blood into circulation and supporting the internal contractions that generate heat. When the belly expands, warmth rises from the core like steam from a pot. The second layer is the mid-chest breath. While the abdomen maintains its slow rhythm, the chest breath works at a different pace. The monk inhales lightly into the ribcage, widening it horizontally. This breath is shorter and more frequent, designed to keep the intercostal muscles active. When the ribs expand, the vibrations from the hidden tissue technique spread farther, warming the entire thoracic cavity. The chest becomes the chamber where heat is refined. The third layer is the high clavicular breath. This breath is delicate, almost invisible. The monk inhales a very small amount of air into the upper chest right under the collarbones. This tiny movement activates the muscles around the shoulders and neck, preventing the cold from settling there. Many people lose heat through the upper body because tension accumulates in the neck. The clavicular breath dissolves that tension and keeps warmth circulating upward. Each layer moves independently but also in harmony. The belly breath is slow, the chest breath is medium, and the clavicular breath is fast and subtle. When these 3 rhythms overlap, the body feels as if it is being warmed from several directions at once. Heat rises from the core, spreads across the ribs, and climbs toward the shoulders and head. Layered breathing also affects the nervous system. The slow abdominal rhythm calms the lower body and stabilizes blood pressure. The mid-chest rhythm keeps energy moving, preventing stagnation. The high breath maintains alertness, ensuring the mind remains sharp in cold environments. Together, they create a state where the body is relaxed but awake, calm but powerful. As the monk continues this practice, the internal contractions begin syncing with the breaths. The diaphragm pulses with the belly breath. The intercostals respond to the chest breath. The upper chest muscles engage with the clavicular breath. This synchrony produces a wave of heat that passes through the body repeatedly. Some monks describe it as a rising tide, others as a ring of fire moving through the torso. With enough practice, the heat becomes strong enough to warm the skin. Observers have reported seeing steam rise from the shoulders of monks sitting in snow. The layered breathing is what allows this heat to reach the surface and stay there. Without it, the warmth would remain trapped in the core. Monks also use this breathing to protect their extremities. When the fingers begin to feel cold, the monk directs the internal wave toward the arms by changing the rhythm of the chest breath. When the toes begin to numb, he shifts the abdominal layer to send warmth downward. The breath becomes a tool of circulation, not just oxygen. All of this, however, depends on one thing: the mind. If fear enters, the breath collapses. If impatience rises, the rhythms break. To generate and sustain heat in freezing conditions, monks must master not only their body but their perception. Because cold is amplified when the mind reacts, and weakened when the mind becomes still. This leads to one of the most important elements of their training: calming the mind so the body can remain warm. Every technique monks use, internal contractions, layered breathing, controlled exposure, depends on a single factor: the mind must not panic. Cold becomes unbearable not because of temperature alone, but because the mind amplifies it. When fear rises, the body tightens, blood retreats from the skin, and even mild cold turns painful. Monks reverse this process by training their perception so deeply that cold no longer feels like a threat. The first part of this mental training is recognizing the difference between cold and the fear of cold. Most people experience them as the same thing. A monk learns to separate them. When cold touches the skin, he observes the sensation before judging it. He notices the sharpness, the pressure, the contraction, but he does not label it as dangerous. This prevents the sympathetic nervous system from launching into fight or flight, allowing the body to stay open. The second part is removing the emotional story around cold. People think, "This is too cold, I can't handle this," or "it's getting worse." These thoughts cause the body to tense and shiver. Monks don't allow these interpretations to form. They replace them with neutral observations. The cold is touching, the sensation is rising, the body is adjusting. These phrases reshape the nervous system's response. The mind becomes steady and the body follows. Another technique monks use is the boundary of perception. When the cold enters, they imagine a thin layer between their skin and their inner body. This mental separation makes the cold feel external rather than penetrating. Even though the temperature is the same, the experience changes. The cold stays at the surface. The mind feels protected. This allows internal heat to grow without interference. Monks also practice attention control in freezing environments. Instead of focusing on the intensity of the cold, they place their attention on the warmth they are generating. A small spark in the abdomen, a wave in the ribs, a slight rise of heat in the chest. By focusing on warmth, the brain amplifies that warmth. What a person focuses on becomes stronger. Monks use this to weaken the cold and strengthen internal heat. In deep training, monks even meditate inside the cold. They sit still for long periods, letting the cold surround them while observing the breath. The goal is not to endure discomfort, but to prevent the mind from reacting. When the mind becomes still, the body begins producing heat automatically. Stillness triggers internal power. There is also a method monks call cutting the first shiver. When the body begins to prepare for involuntary shivering, the monk intercepts it. He softens the chest, deepens the belly breath, and slightly contracts the diaphragm. This stops the shiver before it becomes uncontrollable. By stopping the first shiver, he prevents the cascade of tension that would otherwise follow. Another key element is emotion. Cold becomes sharper when a person feels stress, sadness, or anger. Monks train to keep the emotional field neutral during cold exposure. They let sensations arise and disappear without connecting them to feelings. This emotional neutrality allows the body to use its energy for heat instead of coping with stress. Monks describe the ideal mental state in cold as calm intensity, not relaxed like sleep, and not tense like fear. It is a sharp, focused stillness. This state keeps the breath steady, the body soft, and the heat rising. Observers often describe monks in cold environments as serene yet powerful, as if nothing can disturb their inner balance. Once the mind is calm and the body is aligned, monks reach the stage where they can perform feats that defy normal expectations. They generate enough heat to keep the body warm through the night, even in freezing temperatures, without clothes, fire, or shelter. But the true test of their mastery is not solitary practice, it is the extreme trials they perform under the supervision of senior monks. Trials where the cold is not avoided but confronted directly. The final test of a monk's mastery over cold is not performed in private. It takes place under the open sky, often at night, surrounded by other monks who watch in silence. These extreme trials are not meant to prove strength. They exist to confirm that the monk's body and mind have reached the level of harmony needed to survive without external heat. The most famous of these trials is the wet cloth ceremony, a ritual that looks impossible to anyone unfamiliar with Tumo. The monk begins by sitting on frozen ground, wearing nothing but a thin cloth around his waist. Nearby, senior monks soak long towels in ice-cold water taken from a mountain stream. The cloths freeze almost immediately in the night air. Then, without hesitation, they are placed across the monk's bare shoulders and back. The cold strikes instantly, and for a moment, steam mixes with the breath clouds rising from his mouth. Most people would start shivering violently, but the monk does not move. He closes his eyes halfway, focuses on the warmth in his abdomen, and begins the hidden tissue contractions. The layered breathing kicks in. Slowly, the cloth begins to warm. Then it starts to soften. Within minutes, water droplets evaporate into the air. Steam begins rising from his back. The frozen towel becomes warm enough that senior monks remove it and replace it with another. This process repeats again and again, each cloth soaking wet, each one dried by the monk's internal heat. The ritual continues until the monk has dried multiple towels without a single shiver escaping his body. There are other trials as well. In some monasteries, monks walk barefoot in snow for long distances, not rushing, not tensing, simply maintaining steady breath and allowing internal heat to flow downward into the feet. Observers have noted that the snow under their footprints melts slightly more than under ordinary steps. It is subtle but unmistakable evidence of heat radiating through the soles. Another trial involves spending the night in a mountain cave with no fire, wearing only thin clothing. The temperature drops below freezing, and the wind passes through the cracks in the stone. The monk sits in meditation posture, activating the hidden tissue movements throughout the night. By dawn, while frost covers the ground around him, his skin remains warm to the touch. Some monks even practice cold immersion, not by swimming, but by kneeling in icy water up to the waist for prolonged periods. They use the cold as a way to sharpen their attention, focusing on maintaining warmth in the vital organs while letting the limbs experience the cold without fear. They do not fight the cold or resist it. They allow it to exist while keeping the mind still. This test shows whether the monk can maintain internal heat even when surrounded by freezing temperature on all sides. There are eyewitness accounts of monks sitting on snow during blizzards, generating enough heat that a small radius of melted snow appears around them. The effect is not dramatic, but it is unmistakable. Their breath does not quicken. Their bodies do not tense. They sit as if the cold were nothing more than passing wind. What makes these trials extraordinary is not the spectacle, it is the control. Every rise of heat begins inside. Every wave of warmth is guided by breath and attention. These monks are not superhuman. They simply understand their bodies differently. Where most people see cold as an enemy, monks see it as a teacher. Where most people react with fear, monks react with awareness. And where most people lose heat, monks create it. Their mastery shows what becomes possible when the body, mind, and breath are trained to work together. The cold no longer dictates their state. They decide their state. And that is the true power of Tumo, the ability to choose warmth from within when the world outside offers none. The monks who sit in snow, who dry frozen cloths with nothing but their breath, who remain warm through nights that could claim a life in minutes. They are not defying nature, they are cooperating with it. They are using parts of the human body that most people never learn to access. Their mastery of cold isn't about brute endurance or ignoring discomfort. It's about understanding how the body creates heat, how the mind shapes perception, and how attention can transform a threat into something manageable. Their training begins early, long before they face extreme cold. They learn calm before courage, awareness before endurance, breath before strength. By the time they step into snow without clothes, they have built the foundation that keeps fear from taking control. And because fear never enters, the cold never dominates. The internal contractions become a silent fire. The layered breathing becomes a pump that circulates warmth. The calm mind becomes a shield that prevents panic from stealing energy. And the body responds. Heat rises, blood flows, muscles soften, skin warms from within. The monk does not fight the cold. He simply refuses to give it his mind. What these monks show is not that humans can become superhuman. They show that humans have capacities far greater than what modern life demands. The cold reveals how quickly the mind collapses under pressure. Their mastery reveals how steady the mind can become when trained. In the end, surviving extreme cold is not a miracle, it is a skill built from discipline, silence, breath, and years of learning not to run away from discomfort. You may never sit in snow with a frozen cloth across your back, but the deeper lesson remains. When the world feels cold physically or emotionally, you have an inner fire that can be awakened, a warmth that comes from clarity, not chaos, a strength that rises when fear falls. The monk's mastery is a reminder that the body is capable of more, and the mind is capable of guiding it farther than we think. That is the fire they carry, and it is a fire that never goes out.